What's up everyone, so we are almost officially at that time now for the Calgary Stampede to swing open skates for 2025. And I'm sure that something a lot of you are wondering is what rides will they have at the 2025 Midway on the grounds? And that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're going to be going through every major ride that they're going to have on the Midway, and I'm also going to be telling you how much tickets each ride take, the minimum height requirement, and my personal rating of each attraction. So anyways, we got a pretty good list here of 25 attractions, so let's kick it off with Alpine Bobs. So get into Alpine Bobs here. This is a really good attraction. Pretty much what you do on the ride is you get seated in your own little car, and then when the ride starts to spin around, the cars sort of swing out a bit to sort of give you that rocking motion as you're spinning. And honestly, I think this one might be my favorite of these three rides at the Stampede. I just really like how it has that rocking motion. It just adds more to the ride rather than you just spinning around constantly. So overall, my personal rating for this would definitely be a solid 8 out of 10. And overall, some other details about this: it of course takes 6 tickets to get on, and it requires a minimum height of 48 inches. But overall, it's an amazing ride and cool to see it back this year at the Stampede. And carrying on, next up here, we've got Cliffhanger. If you want to live out your dreams of flying, then Cliffhanger is definitely a ride for you. Of course, for this ride, you lay down on these little gondola type of things, and then the ride, when it starts, of course, lifts up and then spins you around, and overall, it's just such a weird feeling when you're in that lying position. But honestly, it's just such a good attraction. My personal rating for this would definitely be a solid 7 out of 10. Then some other details for this: of course, it takes 5 tickets to get on, and it requires a minimum height of 46 inches. So overall, a cool ride, definitely one of the most unique experiences at the Stampede. And moving on to the next ride right here, we've got Crazy Mouse, which personally for me, this ride's more of a hit or miss. Every time I'm at the Stampede, this ride, it's really a 50-50 if it will be open or if it's closed because they're doing some sort of maintenance on it. There's been a few times in the past where I've waited to get on this just to find out that they're going to be shutting it down. So overall, this attraction, I'd say it's really only worth it if you can get on it early in the morning when there's not really a line, because when you're waiting in line for this and then there's a chance of hearing that's going to be shut down, it's not that great. But overall, the ride experience itself is pretty good. I like when the car really gets spinning. That's when this ride is really fun. And overall, I'm going to have to give it a personal rating of 7 out of 10. And overall, some other details about this: of course, it takes 6 tickets to get on. You have to be 42 to 48 inches with an adult or 48 inches to ride alone. And overall, this ride, it's really hit or miss, but still, if you're able to get on this, it's a pretty good ride. And carrying on, we've got one of the fun houses. This one is, of course, the Cuckhoo Haus. The Cuckhoo Haus here is a German-themed fun house where basically you go through it and there's a bunch of just random little obstacles that you go over, and overall, it's pretty fun just to walk through. And my personal rating for this would definitely be a 6 out of 10. It's a good attraction for what it is, but honestly, I just prefer going on the rides more. And overall, for this attraction, it takes 5 tickets to get in, and of course, for some reason, it says it's 42 inches to get in, which I'm not sure if they do really have a height requirement for this. They might, but overall, it's a cool fun house, and if you want to go in, it's always fun to check out. And carrying on, the next ride we got is the double-decker merry-go-round. This one's a simple one, but a fun one. Of course, the bottom half of it is just your typical merry-go-round, but then the top, of course, you get to be sort of above all the other riders, which is cool, and it gives you some pretty good views. Overall, if you can, I definitely recommend trying to go up to the second level, because really that's where you're gonna get the best experience on this ride. But overall, my personal rating would be a 5 out of 10. You know, it's just a simpler ride. It's not too thrilling, but for what it is, it's pretty good. And of course, to get on this, it's going to take 5 tickets and a minimum height of 42 inches to ride. So overall, cool to see this one back. And moving on, we've got the Giant Wheel. The Giant Wheel here, I'd definitely say, is more of a disappointing ride, especially compared to the massive Ferris wheel they have each year at the Stampede now. Of course, this one they have right here, it's typically broken on half of it, so they only load at half capacity, which is really weird. So of course, this one can get a long line, and then of course, when you get on it, you know, it does give you some pretty good views, but the new Ferris wheel they have is definitely a lot better and can offer some way better views. So overall, me personally, I'm gonna have to give it a 4 out of 10. You know, it's just alright. But overall, if you want to get on this, it of course takes 6 tickets, and of course, if you're under 54 inches, you have to be with an adult. So overall, the Giant Wheel, not one that I'd say is worth it. I'd say definitely try and go on the big Ferris wheel if you can, but overall, it's decent. And next up here, we've got the Haunted Mansion, which if you've seen some of my videos before, of course you'll know this is my least favorite ride that they have here at the carnival. Of course, the one they have right here, it's just always broken, all the effects on it. So pretty much when you get on this, you just travel around a dark, hot room for 2 minutes. Overall, I really wish that they would just invest some money into this attraction. It wouldn't cost too much just to fix some of the light bulbs on this and some of the animatronic effects. So my personal rating, of course, with this being more of a disappointment, I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 10. But overall, if you want to sit in a hot room for 2 minutes, then this ride's going to take 5 tickets from you. And of course, if you're under 48 inches, you have to be accompanied accompanied by an adult. And carrying on, now we get back into the good rides, starting off with Himalaya. And Himalaya here is definitely the tamest of these rides that spin around in a circle. It of course makes you so you face forward, and overall it's not too fast. It goes at a pretty good speed, but it's definitely not as fast as the Polar Express one. But overall it's still a really awesome one. Typically this one doesn't really have much of a line, so you can easily get on this whenever you want in the day. So my personal rating for this would definitely have to be a solid 7 out of 10. And overall for tickets on this, it's going to take 6 tickets from you, and of course you have to be 48 inches to ride with an adult or 52 inches to ride without an adult. So overall a cool ride to see back, and I always love how they're blasting the music on this. And next up, we've got the most extreme ride on the Midway. This is of course Mach 3. And for the ride experience on this, you get to see these little gondolas that are attached to each arm of the ride, and then of course once it gets going, these big arms of course spin around, and these little gondolas are able to flip around and do some crazy stuff, and overall it is just so intense. And overall, my personal rating, I'd have to give this a solid 9 out of 10. It is just such a thrilling one. One downside to this ride is of course the lineup for this thing. You're going to be waiting up to an hour, maybe even longer to get on this, especially with how they were operated last year with them only doing half capacity. So really they only had 4 riders on this thing at a time. So overall, the second you get into the park, this might be a ride you have to rush to if you really want to get on it. And overall, some other details about this, of course, takes 8 tickets to get on. You have to be at least 55 inches to ride or 75 inches max. And overall, this one, it's always a great one, so really cool to see this back. And carrying on, we've got another one of the fun houses. This one is, of course, Mardi Gras. Which Mardi Gras here, you pretty much start off in this mirror maze where you have to figure out where to go to get to the other side. Then, of course, you go up to a second floor where there's a bunch of mirrors you can look at. And then, of course, a slide to end it off. Overall, I think this might be my favorite fun house. It's just really fun to go through, and I like all the mirrors that they have on. It's just so funny. So overall, my personal rating for this is a solid 8 out of 10. And, of course, get on this. It takes 5 tickets. And, of course, you can ride without an adult if you're over 36 inches. Or if you're under that and you want to go through, you have to be accompanied by an adult. So overall, a cool funhouse, and if you want to go through a funhouse, this is definitely one I'd recommend. And moving on, if you're scared of heights, this might be one you're going to avoid, because this one is of course Mega Drop. Mega Drop here is of course the Stampede's drop ride, and it is such a fun one. Of course, it's just a short ride. You get lifted to the top and then you get dropped down, but overall that drop is so fast and so fun. And also when you're at the top, you get a pretty good view of the Stampede grounds. So overall, I love this thing, and it's going to be my first 10 out of 10 here on the list. And overall, to get on this, it of course takes 6 tickets. You have to be at least 54 inches to ride or a max of 87 inches. And overall, this one, I definitely recommend. This is such a good ride. And carrying on, if it's a hot day, which typically it always is at Stampede, the Niagara Falls is a ride that you may just want to go on. Of course, this ride right here is pretty much just your typical log flume ride. You get to see a little log, and then you get to go up 2 different hills and go down these waterfall type of things. Unfortunately, this ride has similar problems to the Wild Mouse, where it can experience quite a bit of downtime because of course you'll be waiting in line and then they'll say they have to shut down and do some maintenance on it. But overall, if you're able to get on this, it's definitely a pretty fun one. If it's a hot day, it's such a good one to cool off on. So overall, I'd have to give this a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty good ride. And overall, to get on this, it takes 6 tickets. You of course have to be 42 to 48 inches to ride with an adult or 48 inches to ride alone, and overall a cool ride to see back. And carrying on, we've got a fun one right here. This one is of course Orbiter. And of course for this attraction, you get seen in these little gondolas that are attached to this center arm. And of course when the ride starts, of course it lifts up, the center spins, and then each of the arms also spin the seats around. So overall, a ton of motion going on. And overall, this ride could definitely get going pretty fast, and it's definitely a really fun one at the carnival. So overall, my personal rating for this is going to be a solid 8 out of 10. And overall, get on this, it takes 6 tickets and 48 inches to ride. But overall, it's a great one and definitely one I'd recommend. And carrying on, we've got their second roller coaster here. This one is of course Outlaw roller coaster, which is overall a pretty good one. Overall, the track layout for this is pretty simple. You just get to go up and down some hills and then through some helixes. There's not really any crazy elements or anything on this, but for what it is, the drops are pretty thrilling. Now, one thing I'll say about this one is it's definitely a pretty bumpy ride. Of course, with them having to take this apart and then put it back together, each of the tracks, they don't always align perfectly. So when you're going across this, you definitely feel each of those little spots where each of the tracks connect. But overall, it's still a pretty fun ride. I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10. And of course, get on this, it's going to take 6 tickets and 42 to 50 inches to ride with an adult or 51 inches alone. So overall, a pretty good coaster and definitely their best one at the park. And carrying on, we got the Carnival's Rock and Boat ride known as Pharaoh's Fury. This ride here, I really love how high it goes. Of course, if you're going on this, I definitely recommend sitting in the back row. There you're definitely going to feel the most amount of airtime, and overall, it's just crazy how high they swing this thing. It pretty much goes all the way up to a 90-degree angle, so when you're looking down, you're pretty much looking directly towards the ground. So overall, I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10. Such a great ride, definitely one I would recommend. And of course, to get on this, it's going to take 5 tickets and at least 48 inches to ride. So overall, this one, an awesome one to see back once again. And carrying on, next up here, we've got Polar Express, which Polar Express is definitely the most intense version out of these 3 rides like it at the park. Of course, this one, it goes backwards and it just goes so fast. Like this one, you pretty much do a full lap around this thing in like 1 second, it feels like. So overall, this one's such an amazing ride. I'm gonna have to give it personally a 8 out of 10. I also just really love the DJ on this ride. He's always hyping it up and it's really awesome. But overall, to get on this, it's gonna take 6 tickets, any minimum height of 50 inches. But overall, this one, it's such an amazing one. You cannot miss out on this. And carrying on, we've got one of my favorites at the carnival. This one is, of course, Remix. And Remix here, I've got to say, it's probably the most intense ride forces-wise at the park. Of course, when you get on this, you pretty much get seated in these seats that are, of course, connected to this main arm. Then, of course, when the ride gets started, that main arm, of course, lifts up, spins around, and then each of the seats, the part it's connected to, can also spin. So overall, it's pretty much a very similar ride to the Orbiter, but with your legs hanging down this, it just makes it such a more intense ride for some reason. So overall, this ride, it's gonna have to get a 10 out of 10 from me. It's such an amazing one. And of course, to get on this, it takes 6 tickets and of course a minimum height of 52 inches or a max height of 74 inches. So overall, this one, definitely one of the best ones there, and this one you have to get on. You cannot miss it. And carrying on, we've got one that I know a lot of people love. Personally, I'm not a fan of this one, but this one is of course the Arena Fire, which the Arena Fire is pretty much just this never-ending roller coaster loop where you just go back and forth until eventually it rocks enough that you can go all the way around the loop, and then you get a couple laps doing that. Overall, this one, I'm just not a big fan of it because it just feels like it goes on forever. It's just such a more boring ride for me. I don't know, you just keep going back and forth just over and over, and honestly, it's just not that worth it for me. So my personal rating for this would be a 6 out of 10, but overall, I know a lot of people love it, so maybe you will. But of course, to get on this, it takes 6 tickets and of course 49 inches to ride, so overall, it's a decent one and one that maybe you'll want to check out. And moving on, we got classic one. This is, of course, the Scooter Bumper Cars, which this ride, a pretty simple but fun one. You just get seated in a little bumper car and then drive around the track and just bump into people. Overall, it's a really fun attraction. Personally, I'm gonna have to give it a 7 out of 10. And of course, get on this, it takes 5 tickets and at least 42 inches to ride or 40 inches to actually drive the car. So overall, a fun ride. It's cool to see it's still here at Stampede. And carrying on, we've got another one of my favorite rides. This one is, of course, Star Dancer, which this ride's an amazing one. You get seeing this little claw, which when the ride starts, of course, the claw spins around. And then, of course, the arm of this ride starts swinging back and forth until it eventually does a full 360. Now, one complaint to have for this is I feel the people that operate it each year always try and give you the shortest ride possible. Of course, I've been on these attractions at other amusement parks, which they seem to go on forever. They, of course, let you flip around so many times. But, of course, the Star Dancer here, they only let you do 1 or 2 360s, and then the ride's pretty much over. But overall, it's still a very fun ride. I'm gonna have to give this one a 10 out of 10. And, of course, if you want to ride this, I definitely recommend going on it early in the morning when it doesn't really have a line. But overall, if you want to get on this, of course, it takes 6 tickets and at least 54 inches to ride. But overall, this is one that I would 100% recommend. This is probably my favorite ride on the whole Midway. And carrying on, we've got another classic one. This one, of course, is Starship 3000. In Starship 3000 right here, it's pretty much just your typical Gravitron ride, but overall, it is such an awesome one. Of course, when you get inside, it's sort of like this spaceship. Of course, you get laying along a wall, and then, of course, when the ride starts, it spins around. You sort of get pushed back to that wall and sort of stuck to it. Another weird thing about this ride that I don't understand is the ride operator. Of course, the ride operator just sits right there in the middle and spins around with you on the ride, which just seems like such a weird position to be in, but overall, it must be fun. So overall, Starship, it's getting an 8 out of 10 from me. And of course, if you want to get on this, it takes 6 tickets and at least 42 inches to ride, but overall, it's an amazing one. And of course, moving on, we've got one of the swing rides. This is, of course, one of the best ones, of course, known as the Swing Tower. And the ride experience on this ride is pretty good. You get seated in these big swings, and then, of course, when the ride starts, it lifts you up the tower, and then you start to spin around, and overall it gives you some amazing views, and of course just so much fun to be spinning around on this. And this one, definitely one I'd recommend going on late at night. It's just so nice to be all the way up there and then looking across the Midway at all the lights glowing everywhere. So overall, this one, I'm gonna have to give it an 8 out of 10. It's a solid ride, and of course, get on this, it takes 6 tickets and at least 48 inches to ride, but overall a cool one to see back once again. And moving on, we've got another classic. This is, of course, the Tilt-A-Whirl. And Tilt-A-Whirl here is a fun one. You get seeing these little cars, and then when the ride gets going, you go around in a circle over these bumps, and then of course the ride cars are of course able to spin around, and if you have enough weight on this, you can get some pretty good spins in. Of course, this one, it's a classic at the carnival and definitely one you need to ride. Me personally, I'm gonna have to give it a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty good attraction, and of course, get on this. It's gonna take 5 tickets, and of course, you have to be 46 inches or more to be unaccompanied by an adult, or of course, if you're under that, you can go on accompanied by an adult. So overall, it's cool to see that they still have this classic attraction. And carrying on, we've got the other swing ride they have at the Stampede. This one is of course Wave Sweener. Wave Sweener is a fun one. You get seated in these big swings, and then when the ride starts, it lifts you up, and then you of course just get to spin around in a circle, and overall it's just such a fun one to go on. And of course for this ride, my rating is gonna have to be a solid 8 out of 10. And of course, to get on this ride, it's gonna take 6 tickets and at least 40 inches to ride, but overall it's a pretty good swing ride, and honestly a pretty good ride for a more family friendly one. And finally, moving on, we've got the last ride. Shout out to all of you who have stuck around to the end. But anyways, this one right here is of course X-Drive. X-Drive right here is the newest ride at the Stampede, which was originally supposed to be opening in 2023, but it never did. So of course last year was pretty much the first year we saw it operational at the Stampede. The ride experience on this one is pretty insane. Of course, you get seated at one end of the big arms on this, and then of course once it gets going, the big arms spin around, and then of course each of the little arms connected to the end can also spin around, and overall there's just some crazy movement going on here. This ride is definitely the craziest one in terms of motion. You never really know where you're going to be going next. It's just so random, but overall so fun. So overall for this one, I'm going to have to give it a solid 9 out of 10. It's a pretty good ride. And of course for tickets on this, it's going to take 6 tickets, and for height you have to be at least 55 inches or max 77 inches. So overall this ride, an awesome one, and definitely one I would recommend. And anyways, with all said everyone, that of course is it for today's video. Hopefully you did enjoy. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe, especially if you're a fan of amusement parks like myself. I'm going to have a ton of videos coming out over the summer. So anyways, that's it. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.